Okay, can you see my screen? Great. Well, let's do this again. Well, I wanted to thank you, Don, for the kind introduction and for the invitation to join you today. I also want to commend you for the perfect pronunciation of my last name, which sometimes can be tricky. Uh, so I've titled my presentation Form and Structure. Yeah, my name is Andreas, and I run a studio that's called FamLab. It's a research and design studio that I founded in 2018. And the practice is largely shaped by these two wonderful cities, Bergen, Norway, and New York, that I've called home the last 10 years or so. It's also largely shaped by my background and experience. I've had the privilege of working with many amazing teams and organizations over the years, working in different fields and contexts and in different parts of the world, from Toshiko Mori in gradient design in New York to 3XU in Copenhagen, RRA in Oslo, and Titoma in Taipei. And as such, this has kind of greatly shaped my process and thinking, and also kept my focus fairly broad intentionally, because I think there's a great value to have a very kind of large spectrum of projects that you work on and really create synergies between them. So in this first part of the lecture, my ambition has been to try to present a coherent outline of my process, but I ended up failing to that. So what I've been doing here instead is to go through a handful of concepts and reference points and really the people behind that have been important to me, and try to unpack these and dissect them a little bit and discuss how I make sense of them and how I make use of them in my practice. Okay, so first off, architecture. This is a concept that is surprisingly difficult to pin down and define, I found. A traditional definition might be the art of designing and constructing buildings. But there tends to be these two main classes of definitions, where the second one really deals with organization and structure. And in some ways, we can also make a distinction between form and organization. And in my practice, I've increasingly gravitated to the latter. I find this to be a very robust and useful approach. I also find that good form and aesthetics tend to rise out of careful organization and really use form more as a tool to evaluate a project. Will Wright, he highlights another important quality of architectural design, the strong focus on process. And Wright, he's not an architect, he is a game designer, and he is probably best known for creating the SimCity games. And here this distinction becomes quite evident. Design is the process, not the output, and form is really means to an end, ultimately used to establishing and negotiating relationships. Will Wright was heavily influenced by the work of Christopher Alexander. He was an English mathematician and architect, and one of his most famous books was this one here, Pattern Language from 1977. This is not about architecture per se, but it's rather about a set of core solutions to problems in the physical environment. And it really goes through 250 or so patterns, almost like these design heuristics that can be applied. They range from the philosophical to the practical. One example here might be pattern 68, connected play, which describes the importance of a continuum of safe areas for play, in effect, really connecting families with neighborhoods. And it's interesting that Alexander's work was never really fully embraced in the field of architecture, but it quickly made its way into the digital world, and programmers and developers and designers really adapt to these theories to systematize their work. So it's been really instrumental for the development of what's called object-oriented programming, to name something. The second term I want to jump to is technology. Another one of these kind of fuzzy words. It is derived from the ancient Greek word techne, which can be translated to proficiency in art or craft, or really the application of an art form to solve problems. So as such, it's a very broad term. Today, this term is typically mostly associated with the field of computer science, and information and network technology is certainly a part of technology, but it's also just one part of it. And this was also acknowledged when Steve Jobs introduced the first Macintosh in 1984, where he referred to this machine as a bicycle for the mind. Still, a segue here might be closer to the colloquial understanding of technology today. And this is captured in this quote by John Lanchester. Technology is things that don't work yet. It really speaks to perhaps the process of adoption that's kind of at the core of whether or not it falls into this category. On this wonderful blog, City of Sound, Dan Hill, he exemplifies another aspect of this somewhat limited view of what technology is. This image here shows a so-called Omni processor in Senegal. It's a machinery that was developed through the Toilet of the Future program by the Gates Foundation, and it's capable of creating 14 tons of water each day and turn into thousands of liters of drinking water. So this is unquestionably a good thing. This is another kind of intervention. This is the wetlands in eastern part of Calcutta in India. And this is by and large developed and shaped by humans. And as such, according to this definition we looked at, this should also be treated as a technology. And when these two interventions are lined up next to each other, we find that the latter, the wetlands, really is superior to the only processor on most metrics. Not only does it have a 50x greater capacity for the treatment of water, it also provides biological diversity as a resource for job creation, food production, etc. And this is not to say that the industrial device is bad and the ecological one is good. It's to point out that both of these should be considered technology. And that we just have everything to gain from a broader understanding of what constitutes technology. It's also important to consider and question the application of technology, which Cedric Price, the British architect, points out in this famous quote, which feels more relevant than ever. Technology is the answer, but always the question. And this brings us to the third concept, innovation, which I'm sure you've discussed extensively in your program. It's a concept that also spans fairly broadly. Both of these examples may be classified as innovation, but the impact and implication here might be rather different. There's a lot of definitions and frameworks around innovation. This is one definition that's made in the Harvard Business Review. That's quite neat. If something is only novel, it should probably be categorized as an invention. And if it's purely geared at usefulness, it falls in the camp of optimization. So it's only when you can tick both of those boxes, we really can talk about innovation. Relatedly, we can talk about two broad classes of innovation, disruptive or radical innovation, like the steam engine or the fridge. And we can talk about sustaining or incremental innovation, such as the development of a smart fridge. And I will argue that the impact on society of the invention of the fridge versus of the smart fridge is profoundly different. This is also echoed in this distinction made between efficiency and effectiveness in the book Cradle to Cradle by William McDonnell and Michael Braungart. And loosely, we can say that efficiency is doing things right, and effectiveness is doing the right things. So these are not mutually exclusive. They're just on a spectrum. So effectiveness tends to be an idea that's more upstream. So when you have established an effective strategy, let's say, then efficiency certainly has a role to play. And in a corporate setting, innovation hinges on research and development efforts, right? So if you look at the AEC industry, R&D spending makes up less than 1% of the revenue. If you compare that to the automotive industry, it's at 3.5, and aerospace industry, it's 4.5. These are numbers from a McKinsey study. And this is not shocking. Like we're still making concrete more or less in the exact same way as the Romans did. And finally, this also highlights the direct link between innovation and sustainability, as captured in this note from the latest IPCC report. And again, sustainability is another one of these terms that are thrown around quite a lot, increasingly so, but often lacks a clear collective sense of understanding or definition. And 1 year before the IPCC was established in 1987, this report, A Common Future, also called the Brundtland report, was published. And in it, there is a fairly clear definition of what sustainable development is. It states development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And I think that in order to make really meaningful progress in the face of this environmental crisis we're in, we're just entirely dependent on these definitions that are measurable, that are shared, that are objective. And since then, there's a series of these frameworks that have been implemented and are really starting to make a difference, from the planetary boundary framework pioneered by Johan Rockström to the UN SDG system and the EU taxonomy system, just to name a few. At the core of this issue, I believe, or more, it's kind of quite evident, the idea that we are separate from nature, and as such, this belief that we can exploit the natural world and ignore the externalities. In neural design, this is also reflected in certain ideas of what's referred to as human-centered design, where usability, ergonomics, etc., are certainly important design objectives, but it becomes problematic when the planet's carrying capacity is not factored in, right? So this is a coffee pod, which are quite amazing, especially when we wake up in the morning to just pop it in, right? But it also comes with a downside. It's estimated that the last 10 years, there's 60 billion of them that ended their life on sites like these. So as such, this false dichotomy of human versus nature has really greatly contributed to where we are now, dealing with this tremendous crisis, and really will require a fundamental shift in thinking to adjust course. Vernacular building traditions is very interesting to this end. This is a practice that I've studied quite a bit, and it really revolves around intrinsic harmony with the ecological context, landscape, nature, climate, and time. And the key word really here is adaptation. And many of these ideas are also captured in this book, How Buildings Learn, written by Stuart Brand, who is probably best known as the co-founder of the Whole Earth catalog. And this book, describes case studies of buildings, but it really is about change. And this is one of the key diagrams from the book, in which a building structure is broken down into these 6 so-called paste layers, from the skin to the site, where each has its own distinct, let's say, clock rate, and also a need to operate independently of each other. These ideas are also applied more broadly to the scale of a civilization. And again, we're moving from the kind of the fast and attention-grabbing top layers here of fashion and commerce to these much slower layers of culture and nature. Incompleteness is not a related concept that I found really useful in my work. And I really enjoy this quote by Brian Eno that really touches on the importance of including people in the completion of design. This becomes evident in a project like this, The Fun Palace by Cedric Price, where he worked with the prominent cybernetics scientist Gordon Pask to develop this cultural arts center that really was constantly reconfiguring itself to serve these ever-changing needs and wants, and never really become a singular, complete building. Next is this concept of anti-fragility. This is a term that I've been fascinated with for a long time, and it's a concept that is developed by the philosopher and also mathematician Nassim Taleb in the book Anti-Fragile. And this is a system property that really is defined as the opposite of fragility. Something that not merely persists and withstands stress, but improves under it, like a diamond or muscles or tree or Hydra, this mythological monster that Hercules fought. And I've been really interested in thinking about how these ideas can be applied to design. And then the final concept that I want to quickly put a pin in is modularity. And this is also a concept that most of my teaching have been revolving around. And I find it to be an incredibly valuable and important concept. And as a colleague of mine put it, there are only so many good ideas in the world. Modularity is one of them. And in my experience, the full implications and potential of this concept is not entirely appreciated. Modularity is, this fundamental system property in nature, and you will find it in biology and chemistry, mathematics, anatomy, etc. It's also been instrumental for complex projects such as the International Space Station in bottom left, to accommodate, let's say, extreme collaboration and long timelines. And I also find it to be a really fruitful design tool, which really activates time and adaptation as design parameters. And I find the definitions in mechanical engineering to be the most elegant, and specifically the writing of Carl Ulrich, who distinguishes between two kinds of architectures, integral and modular. And there are two principal qualities that distinguish a modular from an integral architecture. First, functional separation, or a one-to-one mapping of function to components. And secondly, a decoupled or standardized component interface. So in essence, if you change the component or the shape or form of the component, the interface should be the same, should not change with it. And these principles are not limited to mechanical engineering and manufacturing. These applies to any given system, I would argue. And this distinction also sort of brings us full circle back to the initial, let's say, dichotomy between these two definitions of architecture. Okay, so with that as a foreground, I want to shift gears and really discuss some specific projects from my studio. And as mentioned initially, the portfolio work really spans quite broadly, both in terms of scale and context, discipline and field. working with architecture and product and interaction design, design research. But the common denominator really is a deep focus on solving pressing issues using technology. The practice is also twofold. Or one column here really is about the more traditional commercial projects, and the second one is more focused on speculative R&D focused work, almost like a skunk work, really oftentimes looking at these what if questions, and without the need for immediately commercializing it. So there's a freedom to operate without really strict budgets, etc. And sometimes this leads to interesting case studies. Oftentimes they also morph into kind of commercial projects or inform the first column. The first project I want to take you through is the project that really kind of started my practice, and which still slowly but surely is moving through development. This is probably the saddest slide that I will be sharing today. This graph shows the historical development of the number of people sleeping in New York City's shelter system each night. And when I was working on this project, this was status where 80,000 people on a given night were sleeping in the shelter system. Today, this number has tragically almost doubled to roughly 150,000 people. So it's an enormous issue. This project really takes inspiration from the so-called SRO units, single room occupancy units. This is a housing model that is kind of similar to the co-housing models today, and it really played a pivotal role providing housing for the city's poorest. In 1955, New York City banned construction of new SRO units, and the following year, about 200,000 of these were eliminated from the housing market. And this was arguably one of the root causes of modern homelessness in New York City. Secondly, availability of land. Land is really scarce and really incredibly expensive in cities like New York and others. And this project really set out to explore ways to move around this issue, and really was looking at possible uses of what I refer to as vertical land. And the project that developed out of this is called Shelter with Dignity. Although it's an incredibly ambitious proposal, it's also quite simple. So first, in order to make this area buildable, we need a framework to build on. And most cities have an abundance of this flexible structural system, scaffolding. So a modified scaffolding is the superstructure for this proposal. This also houses means for vertical access, on-site installation. And then for the housing units themselves, I was looking at nature for organizing principles, and the geometric shape that gives the maximum volume and the minimum weight in relation to the perimeter area is the hexagon. So this allows units to pack efficiently and tie into the scaffolding, yielding a highly flexible system that can be erected and modified and relocated quite easily. I think the most significant departure from the current offering is this idea of individual space. So in the shelter system today, privacy is a rare commodity. And although these are small spaces, we really try to make them as space efficient as possible. And by combining these different interior modules here, you can create a wide range of different spaces, from different kinds of bedroom units, bathroom units, socializing units, etc. And for the design of the project, I was also working or having dialogue with several people who were experiencing homelessness in New York, And they were, really actually really positive and supportive of the project, and provided valuable inputs on the scope and design of the project, and also provided me with tons of motivation to push ahead. The second project I want to present here is called Glossit. This grew out of an investigation into the issues of food insecurity. It proposes this system for hyperlocal food production in neighborhoods, and it makes use of aeroponics technology for the growth environments. This allows for 90% reduction in water consumption. It also requires 90% less area than traditional agriculture. It is intended to be a closed loop system that captures energy from the sun, collects rainwater, and circulates it through the growth modules. And because of this, you don't need an existing infrastructure to tap into. You can really install this in any given site. And the structure of this is inspired by the hierarchical structure of trees. And this has been translated into this modular kit of parts, which aggregate following a set of branching rules. And then in order to adapt to the given site and context. And this also has been in development for quite a while, and we're now working towards a small full-scale prototype to test the system. Okay, next project up is called Open House. And this came through, it came about through an investigation into the growing issues of loneliness, and really an interest into trying to understand the capacity of the home environment to play a role in alleviating loneliness and social isolation. One key issue that was defined here early on was this tendency of these hard divisions between different domains of space, and the detrimental social effects this often brings. The design is, or some of the design moves are quite inspired by the work of Jan Gehl, the Danish architect, where we studied how threshold conditions can be softened, creating these gradient conditions between domain. And this treatment it tends to be quite effective in stimulating social interaction. The project really is a framework for housing design, applied to this one example application, where we're looking at the impact of size and the number of inhabitants in a housing project, boundary conditions again, the ratio and the location of shared space and amenities, and how circulation space can be transformed to also serve as social space. Significance of access to outdoor space and green amenities, which creates this quite distinct second facade, interconnecting all the apartment units on the inside. And then also a lot of time was invested into trying to better understand the emotive properties of form and geometry, how we can manipulate space or form to better facilitate social interaction, because there are links there that we're starting to really now understand at a deeper and deeper level. So I think that's a really interesting area. And ultimately here, trying to create a new kind of housing topology where the division between apartment unit and the shared spaces can become blurred. These ideas were also further refined in a recent apartment building project in Queens, New York, where I've been working as a consultant with local design studio Duro Deco. This is a project with very ambitious energy targets, and with a developer who's been really committed to socially conscious project. All units were given outdoor access through this set of balcony modules, which also creates this quite interesting facade expression. But I think the most important or interesting aspect of this project really is in the plan, where you can see that we've, if you look closely, you can see that we really try to soften these transition areas, to slow movement down and allow for these chance encounters and conversations to happen organically. Yeah, a few images from the project. This is the final project that I want to talk to you about. It's called CEF. It's a project where I've been working with a team led by a ship design company here in Bergen called LMG Marine, where or Fremlab, has really focused on the passenger experience. So due to the coastal landscape in Norway, a large part of mobility along the coast is water-based. But many of these passenger ships have a significant climate footprint. So this is why there's been a lot of momentum in this field. A group of county municipalities recently took the initiative to try to develop a new generation of fast ferries. And this has resulted in this project here, CEF, which stands for Zero Emission Fast Ferry. And what's interesting here is that the design of the project is just largely shaped by the technology, the core technology of the project. So it's using a hydrofoil system with integrated electrical propulsion. This allows the vessel to rise above the water, and by elevating the hull above the waterline, resistance is drastically reduced and battery range is increased. It also makes for a much smoother and quieter ride. The project is intended to serve a route between the city of Bergen and the town of Rosendal, which is quite near to my hometown, actually. But it's also a project that, can certainly be in operation outside of Norway as well. A careful consideration of the vessel-harbor interface was an important part of our process, just to ensure the ship could adapt to different harbor conditions, and then be organized to best to support these with this thoughtful spatial sequence in the entry and exit procedure. A lot of time was also invested into designing, a warm and welcoming interior environment. And due to the hydrofoil system, movement around in the passenger area needs to be minimized. And because of this, you also need to create a seating area that can accommodate a host of different needs. And we also developed a digital platform, since the passengers should mostly sit in their seats. This is not the case in most fast ferries today. So this is actually more of a movement into kind of the travel experience of aviation. We have an entertainment system, the ability to order food and drinks to the seats, information about the journey and destinations, etc. We also had a high focus on flexibility, just to allow this vessel to reconfigure to different use scenarios and passenger capacities, so it can house or room 180 people in the max capacity. That is CEF. And I just want to basically wrap up by circling back to this diagram here. the paste layers diagram by Stuart Brand. Again, we're looking at these 6 layers from the shallow to the deep, where the top layer really accommodates higher pace of change, and the bottom ones provide more continuity. And I want to borrow an adaptation and take on this diagram from Brian Boyer, who is a brilliant thinker and leads the urban technology program at University of Michigan. He points out that we are increasingly good at these 2 top layers, responding to immediate needs, creating very catchy products and services. Think fast fashion, think Temu, think TikTok, but which really are quite disconnected from and ignores these important lower layers. So more lasting change, meaningful innovation that can make a difference need to go deeper and really also factor in these lower layers. And this is also how I like to think of the work that I do. Standalone projects that really start off in the top and use the speed and energy of those layers to go deeper and also to recognize and respect the deeper layers, to really try to drive positive system change in infrastructure, in governance, in culture. And so to me, I think this kind of really illustrates what innovation could and really is all about. And that is all I have. So thank you.
Thank you, Andreas. Wonderful presentation. So maybe for the students, are there any questions for Andreas? We have about 15 minutes still. Yes, Mo?
Yes, Dan. Thank you, Andreas, for the presentation. Highly appreciate it. Just 2 comments. First is I would like to note that there are more depths of innovation than disruptive and incremental. I think it starts with incremental, goes to blue ocean, red ocean, which is like a 35 years old concept. Then disruptive, then disruption, which is full elimination. And there is a newly coined concept by HBR, which is beyond disruption. And the best example for beyond disruption innovation is the Nobel Prize winner, Dr. Muhammad Yunus, who has created, who is considered the father of microfinance from Bangladesh. He created the Bank of the Poor, if I'm allowed to say it that way. The main attribute for beyond disruption innovations are not competing, but by complementing the current players in the market. So it might be useful in as well in architecture in terms of not competing, but complementing the current players and stakeholders, such as nature. My second comment is it's a question. Wouldn't it be much better for the homeless in New York? I'm not sure if the project was in New York, and with facing the challenge of high square meter per high square meter price, wouldn't it be much suitable to move such project to the periphery of New York to create much more human-friendly environments and homes that can not only provide a place to sleep, but also much more dignity in creating a family and etc. Since it's the block of the foundation block of our ecosystem, our families. So wouldn't it be much more wiser to fix the problem from its root, not in terms of having homeless staying in clustered building within New York, but into the periphery or the suburb area of New York? Thank you.
Yeah. Great. I appreciate the first comment, Mohammed, on innovation. Yes, that's really, really interesting what you bring up. And I agree. I think, it's overly simplified to say, incremental and radical innovation. These are all on language and they're connected, and you cannot have the first one with the other, and vice versa. To your question, which is a great one. You touch on a lot of interesting things there that are important. One is that, yes, this is a super complex issue, and it goes really deep. And the solution, there's not one solution to fix this, the issue of homelessness. And yes, it needs to go to the root. This is not intended to be a silver bullet. This is mainly to alleviate the situation now in a more transitional period. So more housing needs to be built, certainly. But I also want to push back a bit on the relocation to periphery of cities. There's a case to be made for really making place-based solutions, in which people who live in, let's say Midtown Manhattan, really has their support systems there as well, family, friends, work, that are instrumental for them in this time of being homeless. So I think it really serves a role as well to be in the neighborhood and really, be throughout the city and not just in the edge areas or outside of the city. I think that could be part of the solution, certainly, and housing should be, built throughout Greater New York. But again, I think there's a case to be made for place-based solutions as well. But thank you for the question.
Thank you, Andreas.
Other
Andreas, so
questions?
for that homeless the dignity in shelter project in New York, was that built if finally it was actually built?
No, it is not built yet. It's a process. But no, the images were all, renderings. It's still in development.
So what are the, is it like on trajectory to get built, and on who's actually funding, like when I kind of see the concept, how it's like on the, it's a very interesting concept, using the scaffolding and extend to the facade of the current vertical buildings, right? So would that also include like negotiating with the people who are living in those vertical buildings there
Sure.
to add on homeless housing to their building? If that
Yeah.
makes sense.
That makes sense. That's a great question. And the answer is not very straightforward, unfortunately. So to the last part of your question, yeah, there is a negotiation there between, depends on the nature of the site, right? In many areas, you have empty lots that you can just make use of for a certain period of time, right? And in that case, you do not have to encroach onto the adjacent building for access purposes, etc. You only need it for supporting structural purposes, really to hold up the scaffolding. So that's the physical domain. It gets much more complex and intertwined and difficult when you kind of zoom out and consider NIMBYism, right? Not in my backyard, and the kind of the pushback that inherently happens for projects such as homeless shelters, prison facilities, etc. What will be forces at play that do not have an interest in these kind of projects right next to them. And this is a super complex issue that has not been resolved. So it's I have some thoughts around it, but it is certainly at standstill there for many sites. It's self-funded still. I don't have any external funding for the project. I've had a series of really interesting conversations with potential stakeholders. As far as funding is concerned, those conversations often revolve around using these areas for commercial purposes, right? For advertisement, which has great potential. And the idea really is to implement, kind of embedded display within the glazing of the pods. So there is the potential to really self-fund the project through a system like that. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. And I'm just, like also thinking of like if it's like a homeless person resolves like their temporary like shelter issue, but in terms of like electricity, in terms of like utility wise, all those kind of the other parts, right? That besides the physical aspect of just, a place for living, how is it envisioned for the occupants to pay for those utilities and on such?
To pay for them, you say?
Right. Because if they're homeless, I assume they can't afford to pay for the utilities.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, I think ownership models here and is needs to be considered, certainly. And yeah, that is a potential obstacle that needs to be considered, how those are, paid for, essentially. So there needs to be, an owner in place that really, covers a lot of these expenses, and there needs to be alliances built between different organizations and stakeholders in the city to really make sense of that. But this is, again, these are intended to be one part of the solution, and really work in tandem with other services and solutions that also can provide amenities and help. And again, this is also intended to be a short-term solution, just to bridge the gap for permanent housing.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I can't see your cameras. I'm not sure if I'm reaching you, but I hope that made sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
Yes, Olivier.
Just thank you very much for the talk. It's very interesting to hear about your project. I have a question in relation to the open house project, a little bit like my classmates. But you had mentioned quickly that you noticed that the project would have an impact of having better interactions between the people who are living there, or better social dynamics. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Let me quickly.
I'm based in Montreal, Canada, and so we have a lot of similar issues as New York at a smaller scale. So I'm really interested.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I mean, I touched on Young Yale, who you may be familiar with, who really work with kind of cities, and I think his most famous book is called Space Between Buildings or something along those lines. But one of his concepts is this idea of soft edges, of really blurring the transitional areas between domains of space. And it's mostly when we talk about, soft edges, it really is about, or can be about, moving from the street to the building. And oftentimes you will see, at least I've found, new housing projects or apartment buildings going up where this area in between is really minimized to maximize the rentable square footage, right? But it's found that those areas have critical importance for those chance encounters. If you really are thoughtful about how you design them, right? So these are typically areas where you will bump into neighbors, or you will places to hang out, or pick up the mail. All these in between zones are really important. And in this project, we've also been working with trying to implement them internally as well. So the space between corridor and apartments, the space between shared amenities and individual space, etc. But of course, it's not enough to just have a transitional space. It also needs to be designed and shaped thoughtfully. So this is, but I found this to be it's important to really, seating areas, and amenities or things that have where people meet, windows, maybe artwork or plants, etc. in those transitional areas, again, to stimulate social interaction. Did that make sense, Olivia?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Any final questions before we wrap up today?
Can I just make a quick observation? Thank you, Andreas. It's very inspiring. A lot of very interesting things that you've introduced that I wasn't aware of. My background is in tech. I'm a tech person, and I'm right now working to try and introduce digital fabrication to persons with disabilities and working with their caregivers. So I've been trying to use the makerspace as an inclusive space to try and bring people in to the making and fabricating process. So I really like this idea of soft edges and designing to invite people in. And for me, the makerspace is pretty much like a liminal space where, it's kind of in transition, in perpetuity. But interesting things happen in that space. But the observation I wanted to make was the diagram that you ended off with the different layers, where you had fashion at the top and nature at the bottom. When it comes to designing, yeah, that one. When it comes to designing for prosthetics or assistive devices, we tend to go straight into the commerce part and skip over the fashion part quite often. So, I mean, you pointed out that, the first two layers are where most startups, in my opinion, dwell. And we very rarely go deeper than that. But the problem I'm facing now is that most people who have these like assistive devices, they fail to consider how they feel about it. And it's very utilitarian, very practical. It tends to be medicalized, and very rarely do you consider the person's like feelings and thoughts and emotions about a prosthetic device. So that's something that I'm going to have to dwell on a little bit further, but is this something that resonates with you as well, maybe?
Yeah, I think it's a great observation. So thank you for the comments. I've worked quite a bit in the field of psychiatry, where there might be kind of, there might be similar observations made there, where it's tricky to kind of, this certainly doesn't apply to the words made here, like fashion and commerce, but there's some parallels to what you describe, where you might jump straight to, let's say, infrastructure, institution, and kind of institutionalize space, but forget about the initial individual human and emotional underpinnings that needs to be thought of. So there's certainly many examples, or one can make cases of projects that really skip the initial project and kind of mainly dwell in the bottom layers, but fail to really recognize that these are humans and there are these innate, emotional needs that it's kind of the critical lead domino really to start us off with. And I think there's many projects that skip over and then deals with consequences, where you don't have that attraction or I mean, in this diagram we talk about pace and speed, but it's also about the human and the biological and in the emotional. But that's an interesting space you're in, Saad, and project that you described.
Well, thank you once again, Andreas. I think there are no urgent questions anymore. We can wrap it up here. I hope this was an inspiring talk for the students in their final strides of their final or this second to last term. So yeah, thank you once again. And
yeah, thank you so much. This has been really a joy to be part of, and feel free to reach out to me if you want to chat or have more questions coming up. I'd be happy to continue conversations through email or what have you. And best of luck in the home stretch of the semester.
thank you.
Thanks a lot,
Linda.
Andrea.